the perpetrator, they are sicker than we are smart. So the power of a psychopath's ability to manipulate is way more impactful than my ability to give you information that could save you.
No, the only people who are going to recognize it are those who have seen it and have a sense of these patterns.
Yeah, because for a perpetrator, by that age, they have fine-tuned those pro-social skills. So they will do better at hiding. They will do better at covering up who they are, and likely by that point have a depth of tools, people who will help keep their cover in place, right? So no one is immune because they're sicker than we are smart. Like when you don't have a conscience and you will say and do anything, right? Then I'm at risk of being manipulated because I will have a limit. Everybody is at risk of being manipulated. There is no level of intelligence. There is no lack of finances. There's nothing that makes you not vulnerable. It's what you will do once you spot it, once you understand the patterns, that can perpetuate the problem for you.
There are millions of human predators in the world, such as narcissists and psychopaths. We will encounter them in our public and private lives. An unbelievable number of them will fly under the radar of most people. And many of the social systems that deal with them regularly will be just as oblivious. My guest today is Jennifer R. Young, co-author of Women Who Love Psychopaths, Inside the Relationships of Inevitable Harm with Psychopaths, Sociopaths, and Narcissists. She's going to explain the pathology behind the harm, show us how the sickness of psychopaths and the positive traits of their targets are a perfectly toxic match, and what you can do today to recognize the manipulation of a human predator. In this interview, Jennifer R. Young will use her decades of experience working with survivors of pathological relationships to help you understand and survive the narcissists and psychopaths around you. Jennifer, in your words, what is a psychopath?
It's a person who has a diagnosable, meets criteria for a diagnosis that would be indicative of someone who doesn't have a conscience, has low to no empathy. I always tell people anecdotally, it's unrelated to their behaviors in regards to if they hurt someone physically or cause any type of sexual harm. The diagnostic criteria is more related to a lack of empathy and a lack of conscience. So that's what I would consider to be. And actually, the other really two important words are pervasive and enduring pattern of behavior. I think that's another distinguishing factor when I'm working with survivors, that we're not talking about someone who demonstrates a moment in time of a lack of conscience. We look for that pervasive and enduring pattern of behavior.
And in your work, you use the phrase batterers. How do you sort psychopaths from other types of batterers?
Sure. There's some older research that has been reevaluated and looked at in more recent years to help us understand types of batterers. One issue here is in my work in domestic violence for decades, we haven't been encouraged to understand the differences between different types of batterers. In a lot of ways, people consider that to be an excuse. Like if we identify what the issue is, then that's an excuse for the behavior. As a clinician, I see it differently. It's very important to understand who and what you're dealing with. Not only, by the way, you understand yourself, but understand who and what you're dealing with. And when it comes to helping survivors get and stay safe, we need to understand the permanence of the behavior. So according to Holtzcroft and Monroe, back from 1994 and then restudied again in 2014, there are 3 types of batterers. These are their words, not mine. I would probably use different words, but I'm going to explain them as they do. The first type is a familial type of batterer. This person likely was raised in a home where there was violence, whether it was child abuse or witnessed domestic violence, and they learn to solve problems through violence, including verbal abuse. So they take that behavior as a learned behavior into adulthood, and that's how they solve problems. Typically, familial batterers only cause harm to their intimate partners. They're not out in the world causing harm because it's a strategy to navigate challenges. Approximately 50% of batterers would meet criteria there, so the majority are going to be familial batterers. The good news there is that they can unlearn that behavior. right? So they've learned it. They can go to batter intervention classes, and they can learn a new way of coping with their stressors or coping with problem solving, and they can learn to do it differently. The second type is what the research calls a borderline / dysphoric batter. Again, I don't like the words. That's what they use. This type of batter typically would meet criteria for some sort of mental health condition. The research puts borderline personality disorder here. I would not do that. But again, just clarifying for research purposes, the practical application clinically is we look at these folks as folks that have substance abuse issues, untreated PTSD, untreated bipolar disorder. So the nature of the harm they cause is related to the condition that is happening to them. So again, good news, they can be treated. Someone who is an active alcoholic who becomes sober can learn to navigate life stressors and challenges without causing harm to others. And approximately 25% would fit into that criteria. So now we're up to 75% of batters. Could likely change if we use the skills of identifying this. The third type is the one that causes harm wherever they go, and this is the antisocial psychopathic category, the ones that would meet criteria for a personality disorder. Approximately 25% of batters would meet criteria here, and they take this harm wherever they go. Pervasive, meaning they cause harm in intimate relationships, they cause harm to their children, they cause harm out in the community, they have a pattern of behavior that is indicative of causing harm. So when I work with clients, one of the first things we do is kind of explore who and what they're dealing with, whether they're still in the relationship and thinking about leaving or whether they've already left. Helping them understand this really helps chart the course of the nature of their ongoing contact, which can then help them be safer. If we can explain to them that personality disorders of these natures don't change, then they can change the nature of their contact to prevent themselves from being harmed versus their ex-partner who gets treatment for alcohol use disorder and, even after the divorce becomes sober and now the contact you can re-engage and likely be safer. So it's a real safety issue for survivors, helping them understand who they're dealing with.
Yeah. So 25% of these are people who just aren't going to change as we've seen clinically.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Approximately.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of terms now, and I think we can start to see how it can get dizzying. And then you imagine someone who's under the manipulation, the spell of one of these people. It's hard to make sense of it. So you have a term in your book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, the low conscience umbrella.
That's right.
What is that?
So this is kind of, again, our way to kind of simplify the clinical aspects of what we look at. And it is kind of what it means. It's an umbrella term for all of the disorders that fall into the low to no conscience spectrum according to diagnostic criteria. And those disorders, also known as the cluster B disorders, would be borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. It also includes the psychopath. Now, I'm going to give you some diagnostic information here. Psychopath isn't currently a diagnostic term that comes from the DSM. It's its own diagnosis. It is diagnosable, but it's just not specifically listed in the DSM. So that gives us 4 disorders under this low conscience umbrella, if you will. And all of these disorders cause harm. And they all fall under the low conscience umbrella because right out of the gate, those disorders start on a whole different spectrum. And I will add, the other thing that's important, I'm going to say these words a lot, pervasive and enduring pattern of behavior related to low conscience. Again, a lot of survivors get caught up because they're like, well, I did something mean the other week and blah, blah, blah. But you don't have a pattern of that. So all of these disorders fall under that low conscience umbrella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're getting at the personality of the types who are targeted too, which is something else I found illuminating in your book, and maybe we can get to. But just to go a little bit deeper on this low conscience umbrella, so it seems that diagnosing things, really splitting hairs down to, was he narcissistic personality disorder, was he antisocial personality disorder, maybe not a priority for survivors when they're coming through things. What are the big priorities?
Yeah, so it actually leads to the priority when we're treating survivors, which is a strategy I call facts in the face. I try not to give them any wiggle room to psychologically wiggle out of the facts. So if we explain and show that all of these disorders fall under that low conscience umbrella, it gives them less ability to wiggle out of, well, he's just a narcissist, or yeah, he's he's just borderline, and that can be treated. So we're trying to create no gaps with the facts. Now, I'm not, we're trying to explain that these disorders belong together for that reason. They all cause harm for a real reason, but we don't want to give any wiggle room. So that's the main focus when it comes to treating survivors and we want to be really clear about the distinction between these disorders and other things that could be causing the bad behavior or contributing to the bad behavior of the batterer or the perpetrator. So it really just kind of puts it all into a nice little bucket that is easy to understand.
Yeah. I'm curious how exactly you get those facts in the face. As you say, in my own experience, I was approached by friends who recognized what was going on. Unfortunately, they were very credible. A couple of them were medical professionals. And at the same time, I had to go back and write things down and make a timeline of my experience before it started to really click. What do you do with these facts in the face?
So I want to start by saying also that I have no magic wand when it comes to helping survivors leave a relationship. A lot of times people ask me, how do I get my daughter safe? How do I get my child safe? And first and foremost, they're not going to be able to hear you until they are ready to hear you. So I don't want to give anybody the misconception that I can sit down with someone and talk them out of a bad relationship. What Sandra and I have always said is the perpetrator, they are sicker than we are smart. So the power of a psychopath's ability to manipulate is way more impactful than my ability to give you information that could save you. So I don't work with folks that don't want to get out, that aren't prepared. There's stages of change models that apply here, meaning you start to question, you start to explore, what is this? If you're showing up in a therapist's office prepared to talk about it, it's a good time for me to introduce the concepts to you. But for those that have loved ones involved, if they are not coming to you saying, I need help, then you're kind of spinning your wheels. And we can talk maybe about some strategies for that. But I just kind of want to say that what I do is with people who are prepared to hear what I have to say. So what happens is the minute somebody comes and sits down, I kind of start off by saying, I'm probably going to interrupt you because as I'm listening to you, I'm going to be listening for things that are important in regards to what might be helpful to you. And that's one of the first strategies is I'm going to interrupt the thought process. So when they're telling me their story about what happened and they identify a red flag from the beginning that they don't realize is a red flag, I'm going to stop them right there and say, oh, tell me, what did you say? Tell me how that makes sense to you. Now, the other thing is the face and the questions. I want them to generate it if they can. I want them to identify how it felt. I want them to see it if they can. If they can't, I'll hand it to them. I have no problem handing them the information. But I want them to tell the story and start to realize the pattern. So I'm putting those facts out there right away. I also, on that note, I'm steering them away from how it made them feel. Right. And I tell them that when they tell me the story is, I want you to tell me the facts of the situation. What happened? What did you experience? We'll worry about how it made you feel later. But first, we need to focus on what happened. A lot of this comes from the impact of trauma on the brain. When you are activated in trauma, you're not processing information correctly. So having someone guide you through the process of grabbing the information and being able to put it in its appropriate folder can be really helpful, as opposed to letting you sit in front of me and emote. And now I'm just causing more mental confusion. So I really want to dig in on those facts as quickly as I can and steer your brain towards that so we can start developing that filing system for the information, which then helps you turn the corners you need to turn.
So by the time someone gets to you, they've been through a lot, and the cover of your book calls these relationships of inevitable harm. What makes the harm inevitable?
Well, many things. First and foremost, we're dealing with a perpetrator or a batterer whose brain is completely different from ours. And that's a big corner to turn in understanding these disorders and the differences. their brain has an inability to have pervasive and enduring empathy, has an inability to have a conscience, to care about what happens to other people and their impact on causing harm to other people. So when you have a brain like that, and a brain, typically a survivor's brain who's probably a little higher empathy, it's a complete miss. There is no planet in which those two things will connect. So that's the first thing that leads to the inevitable harm, is the complete disconnect between the perpetrator, the batter, and the victim. The other thing is, how can there be anything but harm if someone doesn't have empathy, a pervasive and enduring pattern of empathy? So if I don't care about how my behavior negatively impacts you, then I will never be able to learn or grow or understand to change my behavior, to do it differently. It'll never happen. So how can there be anything but harm if the only thing that matters to me is me? Right? There's no other option there.
Yeah. So let's clarify how that works. So if a person doesn't have empathy, then is it that they don't have a trigger of the conscience, like you might, and then without that trigger, there is no behavior change, and thus harming others will just be a pattern?
Yes. So one of the layman's ways I've explained this, because it's how I learned it. When I read this, I thought, this is it. And then a survivor gave me a story to match. Someone who is diagnosable as a low conscience disorder has a limitation in sensing fear in their amygdala. Now you think, oh, they can't sense fear. Well, what that means is they take a lot of risks, right? They do a lot of things that are exciting, and that sounds all great. But here's how it applies in an interpersonal relationship that causes harm. One of my clients said she was going to dinner with her partner, and they were driving to dinner, and her partner told a very inappropriate joke, a racist joke. And her immediate response was, oh my gosh, that's a terrible joke. It's not funny. Don't do that again. They get to dinner, the waiter comes to the table, and the psychopath turns to the waiter and tells the exact same joke, right? What the psychopath lacks is that little thing coming from our amygdala that senses we've done something wrong. And this is part of what the brain research has showed us, is their amygdala is less activated in times when they've done something wrong. So again, if I was to call you a horrible name right now and you said to me, Jennifer, that's terrible, how could you do that? I'd get a little in my tummy, right? Like, oh gosh, I shouldn't do that. That's my amygdala sensing that I've done something wrong that helps me not do that again, right? And so psychopaths have that limitation in their amygdala. So they're not going to sense, and a lot of survivors will tell you they can see when this happens. If you ever talk to survivors, you can ask them about like that kind of few seconds of a stare, of a blankness that comes from someone when you point out, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. There's like a little misfire, and then oh, okay, yeah, no, you're right, I get it, right? Because they can mimic those pro-social skills, but then they will go tell the joke again. Yeah. Right. So it's that brain issue in them that prevents, in a perpetrator, that prevents them from having empathy.
Mm-hmm. And we're saying the psychopath has this issue. If, say, someone with narcissistic personality disorder is also considered low conscience, would we say same issue?
All the same. Okay. Borderline, narcissist, antisocial, which a lot of people hear antisocial, they think we don't like people. The term clinically refers to against society. So I do like to use the clinical term because it's the right term, but it is more colloquial. I can't say that word. More likely known as sociopath, but that's not a clinical diagnosis. So antisocial, sociopath, and psychopath, they all have these brain limitations. That's what the research has shown us. Amygdala, corpus callosum, prefrontal cortex, other areas of the brain that someone smarter than me can explain to you, but those are the areas that I tend to use to talk to survivors.
Yes, page 82 of your book in my copy. It's an excellent chart that breaks it down, and it is illuminating.
Yes,
with references, scholarly articles cited, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a term that comes up in your book is the predatory reptilian brain. What's the predatory element of this?
Yeah, so it's kind of, they function in that limbic lower brain area. They lack the higher level functions that help us understand more abstract concepts like love and kindness, right? So I always say, like, you and I could have 3 podcasts on the concept of love and what it means and understanding it and the depth of that. Someone with limited capacities in that area, Sandra always used to say, they see love as compliance. Very simple, right? Really good one. That was something she experienced with a perpetrator who explained that to her. But so their brain limitations in those areas kind of prevent them from understanding. I forgot the question.
The predatory nature.
Oh, the predatory. Okay, I got off track. So they've got that reptilian brain going. So their whole focus is finding a target, looking for someone who will meet their needs in the moment that they can control. That is all they're focused on. I describe this as food, shelter, water, sex, and control. Right? So they don't have empathy. They're not looking for that deep bonded connection because they don't know what that is. They're looking to control someone. And that gives them the same sense of calm and centeredness that we get from connection. So someone who doesn't have these disorders, our motivation, the opposite of having a predatory nature is food, shelter, water, sex, and connection. Right? So in order to be successful, we want to connect with other people. Our brains are looking to have a healthy bonded connection. A predator's brain is just looking for control in the moment. This is another really important component here. This is the nature of these perpetrators is it seems like they want to be in these long-term, and even, they're in marriages for 20, 30 years. But if you really identify the pattern of behavior, it's in any given moment, what gives them a sense of control is what they're going to do. So it's that predatory, we talk about luring, going out and looking for a target. Another little pet peeve of mine is a lot of survivors come out of this saying, I'm so weak and I'm so vulnerable, and that's why they came after me. When we know, getting to know survivors, it's the opposite. They're very strong. They're not vulnerable. But what they were was vulnerable in the moment. Right? So perpetrators are looking for someone who in the moment is sad, in the moment who is experiencing a loss, in the moment is having some weakness. It has also been explained to me from a neuroscience standpoint, we do have a limbic connection with each other, ourselves as healthy-brained people and predators, meaning I can sense, right, whether you're safe or you're dangerous. I may not always be right. I may not always get it right, but we do have that capacity. So their brain is walking around looking for that weakness. And they are doing what animals do in the wild. They are going out luring and trying to pull someone in. They are mimicking behavior. They are hiding in plain sight, we would say. So they're out there kind of hunting. And then they kind of test the waters. They put a hook out, right, and see what you do. They're testing you to see how you will respond. I often talk to survivors about, remember the first time you met them and you're at a party and you meet them, you don't know them, but the perpetrator comes up to you and puts their arm around you and pretends like you're best friends, but they don't know you. It probably felt uncomfortable, but you didn't sense it, right? And they're testing to see if you will move away or if you will lean in, right? And again, we're not isolating this as an indicator. We are adding this to a pattern of behavior that we can see how they test to see how your response will be, if you will tolerate or not tolerate, and that tells them whether or not they can take the next step. Again, will you stay under their control? Will you have high tolerance for bad behavior, which is what we don't want survivors to have. We want you to have low tolerance for bad behavior.
Yeah. So you said that they look for vulnerability in the moment, not necessarily people who are overall, broke,
right.
Or these things that people sometimes say about themselves, but vulnerability in the moment. There's a quote from your book, predators shop in the vulnerability aisle.
Yeah, you got it.
Found so illuminating.
You got it. They are out there looking. And again, in the wild, the lion is out there looking at the herd of antelope and looking for the one that's got a limp, looking for the one that is towards the back of the pack. Same thing with predators. They are out there scanning their environment and testing to see who will tolerate their bad behavior.
Mhm.
And they will often keep, we make a joke about it, but it's not really a joke, but they will often keep many people on the hook until they can pull one in.
Oh yeah,
You know?
I've seen it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so, so with this, it seems that when they can communicate with you, when they can get into your space, test you somehow, that's the opportunity that they're looking for. Knowing that, what can we do about our own communication to be protecting ourselves in the first place?
Sure. So, first and foremost, you want to not express the three P's: your past, your preferences, and your pain. Now,
Mhm.
when you're newly meeting people, sometimes that's a little hard. And certainly if you're high empath, that's really hard. But those are the things in general that psychopaths will glob onto. So, your past, things that you've experienced that they can then either identify with or help you sort out or be the only person who understands it, right? Your preferences, how you like to do things. A predatory tactic is mimicking your behavior. Twinship, right? I'm like you. I understand you. I do the same thing. We hear this all the time is, for the first 6 months, my partner did everything I wanted to do. And then after 6 months, I found out, no, they didn't like any of those things, right? So when you share your preferences, it just tells them exactly what to do to lure you in. And then your pain. Anytime you give a perpetrator your emotions, you're giving them a tool to manipulate you, right? So if you express to them, this makes me feel sad, guess who's going to show up when you feel sad? Now, by the way, they've attached themselves to you kinesthetically, psychologically, attached themselves to your sadness. So unfortunately, that bond then repeats itself. So even when you are not in their presence and you feel sad, you will then think of the perpetrator, right? It's also called state dependent learning. So the state that I'm in when I am connected to another person or when I learn information can dictate how I perceive that person. So if I'm sad and you hug me, now that's connected. So whether you make me sad in the future or not, my brain will likely default to you. I had a survivor built a house with her new psychopathic husband, and they put a tree in the front yard and he put a bench there. Very sweet, wonderful, loving. Every time they got into a fight, he took her to the bench and they resolved their issues there at the bench. He made that connection, right? He used her pain and connected himself to the healing of that. And so when you're new in a relationship, you don't want to give them the tool that they can then use to manipulate you. And it's really, I just had a client in here this week and talking about dating again. And how do you newly date with someone and don't tell them anything about yourself? Well, it's hard. I get it. I want you to get everything you can about him, but I don't want you to reveal anything about yourself. So I get that. But certainly limiting that, being mindful of that is important. Depending on the situation of meeting someone new, whether if you're in a social setting versus an intimate setting, you want to use as few words as possible. Words are the tool they use. So they get a hold of your emotions by using language and words. So if you're leaving a relationship, we talk a lot about limiting your contact through not using a lot of words. But even when you're starting out, you don't want to talk a lot. Now, that's silly for me to say. How can you meet someone new and not talk? Limit your words related to the three Ps and stay in the right now, right? So you can talk about what's happening in the weather. You can talk about what you saw on TV. You can be the person asking the questions as opposed to the person answering the questions. So that can help you kind of keep some objectivity until you can watch for a pattern of behavior over time.
Mhm. Jennifer, this is making me see so much risk in things like social media and group chats,
Gosh,
where the
so
things that
much.
people like to put on social media are their past. I lived in this city, I went to this school, these are pictures of me from years ago, their
Absolutely.
preferences. It used to be trendy for
Absolutely.
people to make lists on social media, my
Yes.
favorite movies, my
Yeah.
favorite books, my favorite places
Yes.
to go, and then your
Yes.
pain. Oh, my cat
Yes.
died.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, this is what people do. And
That's
then
it.
for the predator, this is usually easily accessible. The one who I know, he pre-stalks people
Yeah.
via social media, and then he
Yep.
gets on large group chats for community things that people are interested in. And then he's studying people's behavior there, and he can even
Yep.
see videos that are posted. He knows where people are in the moment.
You got it.
It's
And then he
so
goes,
dangerous.
and he goes in.
Mhm.
And that you're exactly right. It's so dangerous. Things move so quickly in the world socially now. Like you said, with the flow of information and what we are conditioned to share and conditioned to talk about, I always tell my clients, you got to date like it's 1950. And that is the opposite of what's happening in the world today, right? Like you don't want to share. You don't want to have them to the house. You don't want to, text for hours and hours, and all the kids today are like FaceTiming for hours and hours together. It's super dangerous. It's the perfect, breeding ground for these disorders. Yeah, it is. It's just dangerous.
So
Yeah.
we've established this extremely predatory nature that it is a need as basic as a healthy person would have for human connection. Which is a life and death thing.
Yes.
So it's that strong, the predatory instinct. How do they go out and then camouflage the sickness?
Yeah. So we call those pro-social skills. So every person who meets criteria for these disorders has a mask. Now, by the way, we all have a mask. I present differently here talking to you than I would at home later with my husband, right? But because we want to connect with people, we work on authenticity. We work on trying to have our mask and ourself be as close together as we can, right? Because when it's far apart, when I'm disingenuous or inauthentic, I feel uncomfortable. I don't feel good, right? Because I want to connect with you, with people that are listening. So I want to be as much of myself as I can. It'll never be perfect because we have behaviors, right? We have pro-social skills. So it's the same for someone with these disorders. They have to have a mask to function in the world. In general, they start on a whole different place. They start way farther apart because they're not looking to connect. They're looking to control. So just the foundation right there means their mask and who they are is much farther apart than yours and mine would ever be. By the way, that's one thing I listen for when I'm talking to folks and helping them see what they're dealing with, that the person on one hand has a pattern of lies they told, and on this hand says they're the most honest person in the world and believes honesty is so important, right? So there's a complete disconnect. Or someone is so kind, but behind closed doors, there's berating and there's a disdain for humans. They behind closed doors, they talk about how terrible people are, but when they go out in the public, they're just the most wonderful thing. So they learn these skills in order to function in their environment. Now, here's where we get into kind of distinguishing different types. I don't want to use the word types. Different behaviors we see that classically people might identify with psychopaths. So depending on the environment they grew up in, they can have less of a mask or more of a mask. So if someone grew up in an area where crime was acceptable and bad behavior was acceptable, their mask can look like, yeah, I'm a badass criminal. I can go out and do these things and no one will do anything about it, right? However, if you grow up in an upper middle class Ivy League home and it's acceptable for you to put a suit on and go play golf and talk a certain way, then that's the mask that you create. So the mask is dependent on the environment. This is also where we see some of the more dangerous behaviors. They may learn early on that it's acceptable to cause physical harm to people, and that's what they come to know. And that becomes part of their behaviors that are in line with how they have to present to the world or not. So they all have to have a mask. When I'm talking with survivors to help them understand the value of this is, our brains want to separate that out. Our positive natured brains as survivors or people that experience this, we want to understand, dare I say, excuse away the bad behavior so that it's more acceptable to us. So oftentimes we say they're a liar or they're a truth teller, right? They're either this or that. And that allows our brain to take those sides of that person and tie them up in a pretty little package that's tolerable to us. The reality is it's an and, right? I'm a liar and I'm a truth teller. I'm mean and I'm kind. You can't separate that out. That's where your brain is getting stuck cognitively, dissonantly, is getting stuck. It can't sort it out. But when you explain that someone has a mask and it is all bad, then your brain goes, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I've also had survivors tell me, once we discuss that concept, that it's actually the good stuff that makes them more dangerous. That is the manipulation, right? If they walked around with no mask, there wouldn't be a problem here. I probably wouldn't have stayed. But it's the mask that is the real harm. So linking those together becomes a strategy to understand and maintain no contact, because they never go without the mask, right? It's always there. They are both of those things.
Yes. Yeah, they do the good so they can get away with the bad is how
Yes.
I've come to understand it.
Yes, it's either laying the groundwork for something bad or covering up something bad. One of the exercises I do, a lot of survivors suffer with positive memories, a different type of post-traumatic stress disorder, atypical PTSD, we call it, where the good memories create the same response as bad memories. And that's very unique to these, to the recovery from these disorders. Typically, when you're experience a single incident trauma, sexual assault, you don't have any bad memories. It's a sexual assault. It's all bad. That's where your brain lands. But when you've been in a relationship with someone who is both good and bad, your brain is disturbed by all the good stuff, right? It doesn't make any sense if you don't understand this as a clinician or someone who understands. So what I will do with them when they are suffering with the positive memory is we'll take that experience. Let's say it was a birthday party from 3 years ago, and they remember how wonderful he was on that night, how wonderful everything went, the beautiful flowers and the beautiful gift. And I'll say, all right, let's talk about the 24 hours before and the 24 hours after. And inevitably, we will find pathology. We will find some bad behavior that is directly connected to the good behavior, because they were either covering up for something bad they did or laying the groundwork for something bad that they were about to do.
The predatory animal analogy is so on with some of these details. If you think about it like an animal that would camouflage itself to get in very, very close and then go for the kill.
Absolutely.
So how can it be then that no one is immune to this? That's something I came across in your writing, because it seems, okay, some people can't see the camouflage, but some people can.
Yeah. So no one is immune because they're sicker than we are smart. Like when you don't have a conscience and you will say and do anything, right? Then I'm at risk of being manipulated because I will have a limit. What the difference is and where the risk is for people is I have a low tolerance for bad behavior. So you may lie to me once, you may lie to me twice, but by the third time, I'm like, closed door, you're done, it's over, because I have a low tolerance for bad behavior. Someone who has a higher tolerance may excuse away each lie, some socially acceptable thing, like, some people just, don't know how to tell the truth, or maybe something's going on with them, or all men lie, right? Which is not true. So we use these kind of ways of excusing the bad behavior. So everybody is at risk of being manipulated. There is no level of intelligence. There is no lack of finances. There's nothing that makes you not vulnerable. It's what you will do once you spot it, once you understand the patterns, that can perpetuate the problem for you.
And I wondered too about the role of past experience, which is something else that came up in your writing. There's something along the lines of, by the age of 30 or 40, he's a master hunting machine, and the things that he can do, the only people who are going to get it are those who have already seen it.
Say that again. The only people that are going to get it?
No, the only people who are going to recognize it are those who have seen it and have a sense of these patterns.
Yeah, because for a perpetrator, by that age, they have fine-tuned those pro-social skills. So they will do better at hiding. They will do better at covering up who they are, and likely by that point have a depth of tools, people who will help keep their cover in place, right? So they've surrounded themselves. And the other term here is not my favorite, but it does apply, is kind of the flying monkey thing, right? So it's a person who they're able to keep around them to do their dirty work without a full awareness that they're doing the dirty work. And so they're able to keep those people around them. Sometimes it's because there's threat. I know a lot of ex-wives, ex-partners who don't speak up because the perpetrator has information on them, threatens to take away the kids, threatens to release intimate pictures. So there's still control that happens, which makes it look like the ex-partner is part of the cover, when that isn't always true. So yes, by those ages, they have definitely fine-tuned their structure. Now, the other interesting thing we see is sometimes it can all fall apart for a perpetrator, and they literally pull up their tent like a circus and move to a new town, a new area, and just set up and repeat the same thing in a whole different area, in a whole different circle. I've seen that working with survivors over time, where their partner just packs up and does it again in a whole other town, because they've been found out. So yeah, by that adult age, they have fine-tuned this process for themselves.
So now we've talked a lot about the camouflage in the behavior, also in the manipulation of the social circle to get people who become an advocate for the psychopath or whomever. Now, when someone is targeted, you've really done an excellent job of explaining how that's done in your book and how it's similar even to the things that are done to children by pedophiles.
Sure.
What are those processes? How are they similar?
I mean, it's really not, there's not a lot of difference.
Yeah.
It's almost exactly identical. The word we typically use in situations with children is the grooming behavior, right? Mm-hmm. So in the book, we talk a little bit about luring and targeting, but it's the same thing. It's, I'm going to make myself like you, similar to you, right? I'm going to connect with you in ways that help you feel comfortable, right? I'm going to do for you what you need me to do. Right. And then once I start to see that you're not going to push back, then I can move a little further. I can test a little bit more. Right. I can try this and pull back, try that and pull back. Right. And the problem is, and I don't want to talk too much about children because it's not my area of expertise. I'm going to tell you I think it's very similar, but in case I'm wrong, I'll leave that to an expert who works in that area. But I will tell you that for survivors, there comes a point where your brain is so confused and traumatized that you can't make the right decision to get out, right? And this is hard for people on the outside to understand. Why don't they leave? Why don't they leave? Because your brain is in a state of confusion and emotional dysregulation caused by the perpetrator, not because of you, all right? You didn't do this. They created that brain, that mental confusion. And so you won't make a good decision. I often tell my clients, when you're actively being traumatized, you make shitty decisions. You lose that ability to make good decisions. One survivor said to me, we were in a small group, and they said, someone asked, when do people leave? Like, what is it? Is it when the children get hurt? Is it when they are physically assaulted? Like, what is the thing? I didn't have an answer because in my experience, even at that point, there were so many different ways in which people would leave. And another survivor spoke up and she said, I left when who they were became intolerable to who I was. And I thought that was really important because the leaving happens typically when the survivor is disrupted in their soul, spirit, and character. When it has done something to break me, that's when we start to have those cracks of opening. And that applies to that. I bring that up to talk about the targeting and the luring because in those early phases, you haven't lost yourself, right? So you're on the way to losing yourself, but you haven't lost yourself. So you're still going. And a lot of survivors have very positive, good, strong traits, the conscientiousness, even the agreeableness that gives a lot of strength. So in the early phases when they're targeting you and they test you, right? And maybe they don't call you for 2 weeks or they call you a nasty name and you come back at them and you say, don't ever talk to me like that. And you're like using your strength and power, right? So you're still you haven't lost yourself. You still feel powerful, but the behavior of the perpetrator is still happening. They're still pulling you back in because you're at risk because you have high tolerance for bad behavior. So you're still in it, but you haven't lost yourself. Does that make sense? So yes. Those early phases, you're going to be compliant because you feel like you haven't lost yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another phrase I've heard is that people who are targeted are often long suffering. It's that they'll stick through things and they assume people will change and get better.
Yeah, so we call that high conscientiousness.
Yeah.
So from a personality standpoint, someone who's highly conscientious believes things are supposed to be a certain way. And that's a really good trait. They have expectations for how marriage is supposed to be, or how dating is supposed to be, or how being a parent is supposed to be. And they work really hard to ensure that those things happen the way they're supposed to be. That also comes with a strength that allows them to stick it out and be like, no, this, we had an affair in the marriage. Fine. I know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go to counseling. We're supposed to talk to each other. We're supposed to work through these things. So I'm going to go and I'm going to make that happen because I'm conscientious, right? So this long suffering gives me a little negative connotation. I get it. But I think it's more of that high conscientiousness. I'm going to make things work. I can handle the suffering, right? High tolerance for bad behavior, right? And so I'm going to make it work. I'm going to make it be okay. One of my clients described herself as the billboard of the family, right? I'm the one that can stand out front and say everything's okay. And I can say it with my whole chest. I can say it with every part of my being because I'm going to make it okay, because we're going to counseling, because our kids are doing okay. All of those things, right? So there's a strength that happens in survivors that end up in these relationships for a long time. The weakness we see in them comes because they have been torn down. So in the length of the relationship, there is this strength from the conscientiousness, and I can make this right, until the soul, the character starts to be destroyed, and we start to question, can I do this? Am I a good wife? Am I a good parent? Then we start to get torn down. And so when these survivors leave relationships, that's what we see on the outside. Oh, they're so weak. Oh, they couldn't, And so that's why we typically identify folks who come out of these relationships with that level of weakness, when it's the opposite. Their strength was taken advantage of. They're very strong, very determined, very focused on fixing, making things okay, and have that long-term ability to do that. High resiliency factors. They just don't. The partner is sicker than they are smart. So it's inevitable they're going to get their soul turned down.
Yeah. Yeah. And sicker than they are aware, even. I wonder if there's pride around being smart, but I think we can all recognize that we weren't aware.
Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. And you don't know it in the context of dangerous personality disorders, right? So we all understand the idea of infidelity. We understand the idea of verbal abuse. But if you don't understand it in the context of the pervasive and enduring pattern of personality disorders, it doesn't mean anything. Society tells us to stay in the marriage. Society tells us Jesus will fix it. Society tells us watch some more Oprah, and fix yourselves and take a break and, all of those things. And none of that applies here. None of that applies here. And so until you get that framework of understanding, you will keep doing what you have learned and what society has told you to do.
But Jennifer, we have this low conscience individual who has targeted the person who is going to continue to believe that that low conscience individual will change.
Yes.
This dynamic seems near impossible.
Yes.
And if you are to come to terms with that, if you're someone who believes that people can change, there's good in everyone, and then you realize that you have been very close with someone who cannot change and is by their biology, their brain structure, different in the ability to empathize with you, have a conscience, and change their behavior, that must be demoralizing.
Demoralizing, demeaning, like all the things. It is completely and utterly devastating. And again, you have to add in that not only is it the awareness of who they are, but the awareness of what was done to you, that most of these survivors have now done behaviors that are completely opposite of who they are. We talk about cognitive dissonance and how that impacts. Cognitive dissonance is holding two opposite thoughts that you can't make sense of, that elicits a sense of fear, helplessness, confusion. And so in these relationships, initially you have some cognitive dissonance about who your partner is. You start to see some behaviors that you question. He's nice, he's mean, he's a liar, he's a truth teller. And it kind of, tickles your brain a little bit. Then you have, and this is when it gets deeper, you start to have cognitive dissonance about the relationship. There's infidelity, but he keeps showing up and we've renewed our vows. Or, he's, shows up for the kids, but, doesn't want to have anything to do with them. So you start to question the relationship. But the worst cognitive dissonance that comes later is cognitive dissonance about who you are. Through the process of being manipulated, and the gaslighting happens, and all of those things, you start to then question, who am I? I've now told lies. I've lied to people I care about what's going on in my relationship, right? I have to lie to stay safe in my own home, right? In some cases, I've developed a drinking problem. I've been arrested. I've now, betrayed people at work, with my business or in a work setting. So now I become someone I don't recognize. And so when you come out of that, you're left with, oh my gosh, your wreckage, the wreckage you created. As a product of being with a dangerous person, but nonetheless, wreckage you created. It's completely soul destroying. It's, there's a lot of work that has to be done rebuilding who someone believes they are. Lots of work.
Yes, people I've talked to in the cult space, they talk about moral injury after
Yes.
coming out of a cult and things like this. And it just
Yes.
seems so hard for people to reconcile that there is a bad person that they were
Yes.
dealing with.
Yes.
Any ideas for people who simply struggle to come to that?
Well, first of all, turn on Netflix, turn on Prime. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of documentaries and movies. Who do people think these stories are from? I mean, this is the society we live in. So to believe it doesn't happen would be to not watch television. And I say that to say, real stories, you watch the stuff. Who do you think those people are? And I also think it's a failing of the clinical world to not have done our job to educate society as to the nature of these disorders. It's my responsibility as a clinician to help people understand diagnostics, just like doctors have a responsibility to share about heart disease and diabetes. It's my responsibility to teach people about personality disorders and the harm that is caused. Up to 7% of the population would meet criteria for one of these disorders. That's a lot of people. I'm not good at math, but it's about the population of Florida. It's a lot of people. So helping people understand that exists in the world is a part of it. And we can see it everywhere. It exists. And it's not this made up narcissism. It's not this, made up, oh, he's a psychopath, he murders people. That's not what it is. Again, my clinical field has done a terrible job helping people understand these disorders, which is why your work becomes so important, because it's truly talking about the nature of these disorders in the appropriate way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you said about the stories that we see too, some of the people I've talked about have even been in documentaries.
Yeah.
I've spoken with Mark Vicente, who's been in one called The Vow, and they break down the cult leader of that, Keith Raniere. This guy charmed everyone. He was having sex with all the women. All the men thought he was cool. Everybody thought he was really special. People were putting millions of dollars behind his efforts. And it turns out that he was very different.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's really one of the recovery things we look for and we teach, after we've gone through a lot of stuff, is that the survivors have a changed worldview, that they understand that, they take the rose-colored glasses off, if you will, that not everybody is safe, not everybody is dangerous. Again, society has done that to us, that see everybody as kind because you're kind. By the way, that's our personality. That's how personality works. It's the filter that we see the world through. So if we're taught, if I'm kind, you'll be kind. And that's wrong. That is not an accurate lesson. The reality is we can use our filter, but we also have to have the filter of objectivity. We have to remove our filter to see who people are. That's what we need to be teaching people, is pay attention to who people are outside of what you feel, outside of what you think, outside of what you understand. Look at the behavior, evaluate the behavior, talk to other people about the behavior, get a different perspective, because not everybody is who you think they are. It's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, for people who want to be more aware, let's come back to some of those tactics that we were talking about. We kind of touch things at a high level. There's this idea of luring. There's this idea of grooming. In your book, you have excellent pieces where you go to a narrative. You invent this character of Tori, and then Tori is having run-ins with one of these men, and we see exactly how she does it. And for survivors, I've shown people that narrative, and they go, "Oh, it was that. It was that." Yeah. It's so relatable. What are some of those specific things?
Yeah. I think one of the big ones for me from experience and watching these things happen is how fast predators move. They move hard and fast. Now, in today's society, it's certainly acceptable sexually to do anything you want to do that's consensual. But if you're really concerned about wanting a long-term relationship and wanting a healthy relationship, you really have to slow things down. What we see is perpetrators will push on that boundary. So, I'll often tell people, date once a week. Don't date every third night. Don't go on 8-hour dates, right? You want to slow things down and watch and see if the person pushes. If you are able to maintain distance, objectively, emotional distance, physical distance, you will see who comes towards you. That's what we want to watch for, is, are they coming for you when you don't want to be got? Right? So we're moving really slow. We're maintaining our life and our existence, and we're seeing who comes. I often tell people too, like, you want to find a person, whether it's a friend or an intimate partner, who will join your life, not disrupt it, who will be a part of a life you already have, not help you make a life. Right? So being who you are, knowing who you are, holding your ground and holding those boundaries is the practical application of preventing harm. And then the other thing is, because you are all at risk, I'm at risk, everybody's at risk, if you can't do that and you get in, you've got to, number one, have an understanding of these disorders, that they exist, so you actually know what you might be looking for when you're ready to look. And then I jokingly say you got to have a good pair of running shoes, because the minute you know, you have to run. Fast, hard, and completely. You cannot look back. You cannot have any space. It's hard to, after 3 dates, say, oh, they're a psychopath. That's not really diagnostically what I would suggest. But after 3 dates, if you've seen red flags, if you've seen pink flags that add up into a pattern, you, as a person who's looking for an intimate partner, cannot take a chance, should not be taking a chance. It's not worth it. Right? So you've got to have a good pair of running shoes and know exactly how to shut it down and hold that boundary, right? And not let any wiggle room of excuse get in the way.
Yeah. And you're saying 3 dates. Maybe some people are assuming normal dates. Yeah. But, whether intimate partner or not, what I've seen with one of these guys is that when he gets his targets set on someone, the time spent together is not normal. It
Absolutely.
is a lot of time. It is high intensity. He is testing boundaries.
Yes.
And the whole situation appears organic to the target.
Yes. Right.
But in fact, it is carefully orchestrated. He just happens to be where you are with his dog and looking 100%. Cute. And what an amazing coincidence.
What an amazing thing. And you're exactly right. That's what makes this so hard, is because you want to kind of be normal and natural, and you meet someone new, whether, again, it's a friend or an intimate partner, and you want to spend time with it. It seems normal and okay, but it's not. It's not. It is safer to function on the surface. Healthy relationships develop on the surface and then move down. They don't start down in that deep bonded place and then move up to the surface. We start on the surface. So we stay in those surfacey places. Let's show up together every once in a while. I'm not talking to you about my challenges and my struggles. I have other people to do that with, because I'm starting in the surface and I'm going to develop a healthy relationship with you. So it does, if you're really trying to find a healthy relationship, you really do have to do it differently. It should not be that, intense, eye-gazing, low light music and talking for hours. That is not going to help you find a safe person. It's just not. I get it. I get that people meet people that way and it turns out fine. I'm not trying to be, too black and white here, but if you're really trying to maintain some safety and have some challenges with that in the past, you really should be doing it differently.
Mm-hmm. And one of the specific strategies that makes that experience so intense is how they twin you. What is twinning?
Yeah, so it's basically being who you need them to be. Right? They figure out what you need, what you like, what you believe, what you understand, and they show up and do that. That's why these disorders typically, we can identify them as chameleons, because even when they're done twinning with you, by the way, they're going to go twin with all the other people. And when you have been in a relationship with them, it's one of the things I ask, well, what are they like when they're at work? Oh, they act this way. And what are they like when they're with this friend? Oh, they act differently, right? Because they turn that chameleon side. So that twinning with you in the beginning is everything you like, they like, everything you feel, they understand, everything you see in the world, they want to see. So again, can that also be the start of a healthier relationship? Yes. So that's why it takes time to parse that out. But it is certainly one of the red flags in the beginning, is that everything you understand and believe in is the same for them.
So to do that effectively, You need information on people, and normal relationships do depend on some degree of commonality.
Yep.
So what is happening that this sort of person, we've talked about how they can pre-assess you through your social media and things like that. But what is happening then in the moment for them to elicit more information from you than you might even realize?
Well, again, the big issue is that they get you to stay. They get you to stick around. They manipulate you in the moment through sex, through other levels of intimacy, through long dinners and hikes and all that stuff. Like, they're going to make it so that they are in your space, which, especially for people with high empathy, you're more likely to start sharing, right? Like, you may be able to start on the surface, but after 3 hours, you're deep, because that's who you are. So they are able to create scenarios where they keep the pressure on, so there isn't anything else to talk about. So we have to talk about something. So we're going to talk about the things that hurt me the most, right? It also makes it really hard these days because of texting, right, and other ways. So even when they're not with you, they can be texting, and you're texting all day. And again, after so many texts, then you're going to start talking about, oh, this person at work annoys me because they remind me of my father who did this to me, And so all that pressure, keeping that pressure on, just wears you down. And naturally, separate from wearing you down, it's just what we do as people. We start sharing, we start talking, because we connect. We connect through that. And so we're wanting to connect. So the more they're literally looking to be in your space. They're looking to control what is happening around you. Another example, like I always tell people, like when you first start dating, like spend a weekend without them. Tell them you have, a girls' weekend or whatever. A lot of these folks, when you say, oh, I'm going to be away with the girls, I don't want to hear from you for the weekend, they send flowers, they send cards, they do all these cutesy things, and oh, your boyfriend is so nice. But really, it's just a way for them to be in your space, right? It's a way for them to inject themselves into your environment. So it's that constant pressure of wanting to control your environment without it looking like control. It looks like a cool boyfriend.
Yeah, that injecting themselves into your environment is ringing so true with me.
Yeah.
The one
Yeah.
who I've seen, he positions himself as a leader and a teacher and a mentor. So
Yep.
people are immediately groomed into a subordinate role where they
Absolutely.
need to elicit information to him.
Yes.
And then he needs to be communicating to them constant feedback. And then he
Yes.
puts them in a group chat where he is putting out messages that just seem to be to the group, but he is on your phone
Yes.
all day. And in your book
Yes.
too, you have the example of the man who meets the woman, and then, where were you? Oh, I was in Europe. Oh, I've been to Europe. What do you do? And then she says something about
Absolutely.
art. He goes to the bathroom, looks up a bunch of facts about art in
Got it.
Europe on his phone. And
Yes.
then, wow, what do you know? That kind of painting at that chapel, wasn't that gorgeous?
Yes,
It's
100%.
it
They
works.
love that stuff because for them, it's a win in the moment. Like, we feel a win when we connect with someone else, right? When we do have a shared experience, they feel a win and when they can get one over on you, when they can pretend to be someone who understands what that European city is like, and you fall for it, it makes them feel settled. I've controlled this conversation.
It makes them feel settled. It's that
Yeah.
basic a need from back to the brain anatomy thing, like we were talking about, just like, when you're
Yes.
sick and you want to be cared for. It's
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's that strong a drive.
Yes, and you will see, a lot of times people describe sociopaths or psychopaths as not having emotion. That's also a fallacy, a
Hmm.
myth. They absolutely do have emotion. Their emotions come from a lack of control in the moment. So when they feel out of control, they feel sad, they feel anxious, they feel frustrated, they feel whatever, those negative emotions, because they can't control the moment. When they
Hmm.
are in control, they are settled. Just like us. When we don't feel connected, we feel frustrated or sad. When we feel like we've connected with the person, we've healed whatever it was, then we feel settled.
This is helping me make a lot of sense of something too, because this idea that they don't have emotions never quite sat with me.
Oh, it's
I've
not.
definitely seen
Yeah.
frustration and anger, and
Yes.
so now to understand that it's
Yeah.
at that lack of control.
Yes, absolutely. It comes from not being in control in the moment, which is why survivors, from a actual survival strategy, if they can control the perpetrator by letting them be in control, they will be safer, which is why the compliance becomes dangerous, but it also becomes a survival strategy. I would expect a survivor to comply to stay alive, physically stay alive, emotionally stay alive. And that is the advice I would give with someone who's trying to leave and can't leave yet, is I need you to comply. What things can you comply with to keep the perpetrator from causing you more harm,
Mm.
right? That's when you become smarter than they are sick. I don't like to toss that one out because I don't want people to believe they actually can be. But once you start to understand truly who you're dealing with, you can then use some of these strategies to manage the situation. And I use that word. You won't make it better. You cannot stay in management phase. It still causes you harm. But if you're trying to leave and you can't leave and you've got kids, you can manage it to prevent harm by understanding who and what you're dealing with and offer compliance as a strategy to manage. So I can comply. I see what that is. I see the gaslighting and I can go along with, yes, I'm a bitch, I can say that and I can admit to that because that is going to give you what you need so you stop attacking me, right? I can do that. When the opposite of cognitive dissonance is dialectical thinking. So that's the goal here, is that we shift from cognitive dissonance to the confusion from the two sides to clarity of the two sides. So from a dialectical thinking standpoint, when I come to understand they're dangerous, I can hold they're nice and they're mean at the same time. If they're being nice to me, I'll be nice. If they're being mean to me, I'll comply. Dialectically, that's not causing me harm because I see it for what it is. Objectively, I see it. So it's not causing me any confusion. So it's not causing me harm.
Jennifer, you're reminding me too now that there's another reason for the value of that low conscience model. I don't need to bring someone to get diagnosed for narcissistic personality disorder if I can know that they fit under that umbrella. And that's enough. And then if you are in that challenging management situation, this person fits under this umbrella, whether they're NPD or whatever, and you can manage from there.
Yes. And I want to empower people. That's kind of important, even as a clinician, that I kind of further state. I want to empower people to understand diagnosis. What you can't do, and I can't even do, is diagnose someone and use it in a clinical, legal, professional setting, right? I can't diagnose you now and then go tell people this is what Brad has. I can't do that. But as a clinician, I can sit with you and show you the DSM and look at what it means to have narcissistic personality disorder, and then take a look at your partner and understand, yes, your pattern would likely meet criteria for these disorders. It's the exact same thing that doctors can do when you come to them and say, I think my husband has a heart condition. And you say, well, tell me what the symptoms are. The doctor goes, yeah, it kind of seems like a heart condition. Maybe you should go talk to a heart doctor. Clinically, we can do that too. Right? There is nothing stopping us from doing that at all. So I want to empower people to become educated. You can't use the diagnosis in a legal medical setting, but you can absolutely understand these diagnoses and use them for your own benefit and to understand. And obviously, I would say go talk to professionals about it. But I think, again, clinically, we've not done a good job helping people be empowered to understand diagnosis.
And if we're back to the tactics and things, there's another quote in your book that I really like. Darkness is a wealth of incredible help. There is a sense that they find people who need things, or they even push people into positions where they come to need things. How can we see that tactic being used against us?
Well, and it kind of alludes to something you said earlier, but they become what they think we need. Yeah. So oftentimes for survivors in recovery, I want to help them get a big life, get a life that does not have room for someone to come along and be something to them that they can't get for themselves. Because again, dangerous people want to be needed in order to control you. So if you create no space for them, you are able to meet your own needs and fulfill your own needs, then a psychopath is less likely to get in. And when I say that, early on in dating, you need to show up as a whole and complete person with a full life, interviewing for a partner to stand next to you. That's the goal. Now, after a year, 2, 3, dating, married, sure, your partner is going to fill some needs for you, right? Like once you're in a healthy relationship, that dynamic shifts. But when we're trying to figure out and sort out who these people are, you want to make sure there is no room for them to provide anything for you, including a person to talk to, a person to talk about your pains and preferences with. You can talk to your therapist about that. Talk to your best friend, not the new guy you're dating, right? So you want to make sure that there is no room for them to be the need that they think. That's another thing, is it's what they think you need, right? And that's why in the end of relationships, psychopaths often get it so wrong, because the survivor's on their way out and is starting to see, and so the psychopath shows up trying to be something, and the survivor's like, what are you doing? Stop doing that, and so that's when some wheels start to turn and things move in a different direction.
Jennifer, some of the things as these progress, the tactics start to seem a little bit hazy to people. There's this idea of a trance and being really tuned into the psychopath. There's even physical sensations. People say sometimes they have a gut feeling when they meet these people.
Yeah.
There's a comparison to being slowly electrocuted by being around one of them.
Yeah.
Let's start with that physical sensation, that gut feeling. What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's a biological response to fear and danger. One of the survivors that I talked with years ago, she said it was the most, when she first met the perpetrator. They literally met on a train, on a subway train, and even that first meeting and the first several meetings after that, she said it was the most excited and most afraid she had ever felt, and that can be misconstrued into excitement, and the fear is removed when we're in an early phase, because the excitement is so powerful that we miss those fear signals. Looking back, that's how she described it. When it was happening, she overrode those fear responses. We are not supposed to feel afraid when we meet someone. That is absolutely the opposite. If you have that fear response, now everybody's fear response physically is different. And frankly, it does mimic some excitement. Like sometimes there's a little, movement in your stomach, or you feel a little pressure on your chest, or you get a little warm sensation. By the way, all of those things could happen when you first meet someone. So it can be hard to sort out. Again, I go back to, that's why the space is so important, because we want to move towards the person, feel the feels, right? Use the intuition, and then we want to pull back and be objective. Let's look at what happened. Now, my client who met her partner on a subway train, right? Had she had the skill of objectivity, she met him on a subway train. She didn't know anything about him, right? A week and a half later, she's having an overnight at his house. Very exciting, woo, he's hot, Instead of pulling back and going, why am I spending the night at someone's house who I just met on a subway train, 7 days ago, right? So your intuition is not your guide, right? Your wise mind is your guide. Your intuition can tell you, yes, this is exciting and I want to go see them again. But the facts say, wait a minute, I just met this person on a subway train. And for people to say, oh, that doesn't happen, we all know damn well that happens, right? We know that you meet someone and a week later you're spending the night. It does. So, being objective and being able to pull back and go, wait a minute, what am I looking for here? What's my goal? I'm not saying that's not okay if it's consensual and that's what you want. That's cool too. But you've got to be able to get objective. And so when you do that, then you can let the feelings in your body settle and start to use your brain to evaluate the facts, if you will, to evaluate what this is, where I want it to go, and what it actually needs to look like for me, right? So it is that kind of response that we have initially that can be very confusing. Please do not trust your gut. It's again, the wrong thing. You can trust your gut and evaluate the facts. That's what I recommend.
It's tricky too, again, Jennifer, because you could say, well, don't just go with it. You only met him on a subway train, but then somebody could say, well, I met him on the subway, but then, he said he went to MIT, and I met his friends, and he's got a group of friends who say that he's the most kind and generous person, and he helped them when they were in the worst time of their life, and wow, he must be great. Yes. This facade can be so many layers deep that it's easy to fall for.
Sure. And that's why you have to go so slow, right? You have to limit your time and watch for the behavior. So every time they tell you something, every time you learn something, you're making note of it and you're waiting to watch that behavior. Do you want to go show up and say, show me your degree from MIT? No. But do you want to wait a little bit to make sure there's a degree on the wall from MIT and that it's a real degree, right? When, you do want to meet the friends, you want to make sure they have long-term healthy relationships, right? And that comes over time, right? So yeah, it is hard, but you got to slow the train down if you want to do this. Anecdotally, not research-based, but anecdotally, in my experience, 6 months is about the time frame where someone can hold the mask on tight enough that you might not see anything. chances are there is stuff, you just may not know what to look for, but I absolutely stand by 6 months. If you can get past 6 months without any red flags, you could move to the next level. Now, here's where people hate me, because when I say hold on for 6 months, I'm kind of talking about not being too intimate, certainly not having overnights. People are like, screw you, that's not happening. But like, it's going to take that time. If you want to not bond, you've got to stay out of the relationship. You've got to not invite them into your world too quickly so that you can't extract yourself. Right? So if you're introducing them to your kids or introducing them to your family and 4 months in, you realize it's all a sham, it's going to be harder for you if you have ingratiated them. So the longer you can take to make sure that there are no patterns of dangerous behavior, the less likely you are to be taken in a way you can't get out. This is not 100% science, you know what I mean? But I'm telling you from experience and from research, the slower you can go, you can see the patterns, you can get the information, you can find the facts, you can do the investigation, you can meet their family and see what their relationships are like, which will give you the information you need for understanding a pervasive and enduring pattern.
And Jennifer, we're talking about not bonding, sex, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
With the differences in the brain, can a healthy person be having sex with a pathological person, feeling more bonded, while the pathological person does not get the same bonding, hormones, that kind of thing? Is that chemistry different too?
Yeah. So because they don't have the ability to connect, they don't have a conscience, they don't have that deeper level connection that we do, they are not bonded to us. That is one of the major differences that causes inevitable harm. They cannot bond. It's not will they, it's they cannot. In order to form that deeper level of bond, you have to have the ability in those brain areas, and they do not. So there will be no bonding. In general, again, from a layman's terms, when we talk about a biological bond, we're talking about a person who is connected to us in a healthy way. We see them as equals, right? We are safe in the relationship, whether they are in front of us or away from us, right? So if I'm bonded with a person, they can be, 12,000 miles away, 5,000 miles away, and I feel secure in our relationship because we have a bond, right? I can know that they'll show up for me and they're safe, all of those things. So psychopaths cannot bond, right? They only attach. So when you're intimate with them, it is about, for them, in the moment. It is not about developing a bond. It just doesn't happen. Which is why we see them in multiple relationships, manipulating multiple people. Very rarely do these folks not have other partners on some level. We talk about a primary partner, meaning the person they're married to or in their long-term intimate relationship, and then several other tertiary separate relationships, whether it's through pornography or affairs or manipulating people at work. They've got all these other people that they're manipulating. You're the primary bond that frankly provides them food, shelter, water, sex, and control. So they tend to maintain a primary bond to keep themselves settled, and then they go out and do what they do, just like we maintain a primary bond to stay connected, and then we go out and create other connections.
Yes.
There's no bonding happening.
Another thing that your book explains so well, there's a chart, and it's this circle, sort of this merry-go-round, and you can see different people in different phases and how the pathological person is building up this pipeline that's continually flowing through the different phases of a relationship.
Right. So we talk about the relationship timeline and the relationship cycle as one. So individually, a perpetrator takes you through the cycle, which is the early stage, the mid phase, the end phase, and the aftermath. The early stage is that kind of luring and mimicking and targeting you. And then we get to the mid phase where they've got you hooked and their mask starts to drop a little bit, but you're still in. You're still making excuses or understanding it. And then the end phase is when kind of the discard, they start to discard you because you fully start to get what this is and you start to push back. Now they're starting to shame you and discard you and tell you you don't understand. And then the relationship ends, and the aftermath is when the perpetrator has moved on to another primary target, but they are still kind of cat-toying and playing around with you. So this relationship cycle is a perpetrator cycle. It's not your cycle. You're just taken into it. So this is how every psychopath moves through people, early, mid, and after. And then for them, because it's happening with multiple people, right? All of these cycles are happening with all of these people out there. From a survivor standpoint, we are bonded with our partner, and we may be in mid-phase, right? They've got us in mid-phase and we're bonded. But because they're not bonded and they're off toying with other people, we feel them pull away, which causes us pain and stress, activates those areas of our brain which are not supposed to be activated in a healthy relationship, and causes us biological, mental confusion and chaos. And so we respond to their inability to bond. We sense that, we feel that disconnect. And then every time they come back, we've got to heal that bond again. And so now we're being ripped apart and put back together by our perpetrator. It causes, again, inevitable harm, but that's what's happening. So perpetrators are taking each person through that cycle, and we're experiencing all of those cycles in our one partner because they're doing it to other people and we're sensing it.
Yeah. So there's this idea of a trance too. What happens with the psychopath and the trance?
Mm-hmm. Super dangerous, but also really normal, sadly. We all have in our brains a natural trance state that happens. It's a protective measure. When our brain needs to shut down, again, in kind of layman's terms, we just kind of go into a trance. It happens when you're driving down the highway and you're listening to good music and you're just in your own thoughts and you're supposed to get off at exit 32 and you end up at exit 45, right? You're like, oh gosh, you're in that little bit of a trance state. And that's kind of a positive way to describe this type of trance. But for dangerous people, they are intentionally trying to get you into a trance state so that you'll make bad decisions, right? So that strategy of, and again, this is state-dependent learning. Another term there, psychological term, is if I can get you into a trance state and then connect myself to you, you will then be pulled or bonded to me related to that emotion or that situation. So they are seeking a way to get you into that trance state. So how do they do that? Intimacy is the easiest, right? Whether it's kissing, making out, other, more intimacy, you are in that trance state and you're just moving through it. It can also happen on a date with low light and soft music, and you start talking about your pains or your past. And then the psychopath reaches over and kind of puts his hand on yours. Now we've got that kinesthetic connection that happens. And here you are talking about how scared you were during a certain time in your life. And he's there to ingratiate himself to you. So now, again, that because you are kind of tranced out and losing track of time, they are there to hold you when technically your brain is in an unsafe state. The reason our brain goes there is because it needs to shut down. Sometimes that's positive and a lot of times it's negative. So your brain is in a state of activation, right? So it's in a fear state. Now they've come in and kept you safe, if you will. This is very, very, very dangerous, again, which is why we encourage people to limit their time and limit what they do early on, because you don't want to. So many survivors have told me, I spent the first weekend we were together, we spent all weekend together. It was just great. I don't remember anything. It was just, this and that. And because they're overwhelming you and they're getting your brain to go into that state. For survivors who have a history of trauma, it's particularly dangerous. If you're prone to be in this trance state, we're also talking about disassociation is the other word I would use here. Again, trance and disassociation are very close. There are some minor differences, but nonetheless, so if you're prone to disassociate because you have a history of trauma, you are at more risk to disassociate or be in a trance when you're in a new relationship, right? Again, because it's a protective measure. If you're meeting someone new and the lights are low and you're having conversations about your past, your brain is naturally going to disassociate to help you, to protect you. Even though you're still talking, you're still functioning, your brain kind of shuts down and goes into a different place. And so now you're at risk of being connected to a dangerous person in that moment.
And so this is state-dependent learning, you said. So that means that, tell me if I'm wrong, that you can be taught to be in this state with this person, and then they can make that sort of a default that they're trying to keep you in as the relationship progresses for, say, weeks, months, years.
Yeah, so the state of mind we are in when we are experiencing anything can play a role in how we perceive that situation. It can happen if you're in class trying to learn a new, math problem, and you're anxious because of something happening at work, if I'm really anxious, I'm not going to learn the math problem the way I need to because of anxiety. So it applies in all situations. So anybody, the way we're talking about it here is if the perpetrator is getting me to talk about my past, and the state that I'm in now becomes disassociated or anxious, and they come in and teach me that they're safe, now my brain has made that connection. And it's a dangerous connection, right? They have now, a dangerous person, taught my brain that they are safe. So the state that I was in made it possible for me to believe that they are safe. This is also in the family of trauma bonding, right? This is the foundation of how we learn that our perpetrator is our rescuer, right? They set up that pattern that the person who's going to hurt us is going to save us. Well, they do that early on by getting us in a state where we feel afraid and making themselves the one who will comfort us.
So that being in an environment where you meet someone who can first sort of put you on edge, but then also say it's okay.
Yeah.
That's an environment where you're immediately at risk. So say, a learning environment where somebody can immediately criticize you, but then also praise you.
Exactly.
Is going to set you up.
Exactly. The person that hurts you can comfort you. That's the source of a trauma bond. So they teach them. It's like the client I told you whose husband built the bench with the tree at the house, right? He was making a space to bond himself through trauma to her at every turn. Every time he did something wrong, he would take her to the bench. He would hurt her, and then he would heal her.
And then environment, touch, physical proximity,
absolutely,
lighting,
yes.
these sensory things.
As they call it, all of those things. Yeah, absolutely.
So this state is so strong then that is it stronger than being presented with facts? You said you do the facts in the face thing. Is this state thing the part of the counterweight to that being presented with facts?
Because what you have created in the survivor is a need to stay alive. So they have to comply. They have to believe the perpetrator if they're going home to the perpetrator. Right. And it's not they may talk to you and say, I'm in danger at home. Right. I don't like my partner. But the reality is, if they're not if they're not starting to really get it, they're always going to comply because it's safety over facts. And naturally, we have to stay alive. Our brains will force us to comply to stay alive. Our brains will force us. Whether we've been told 12 times by our parent we should leave, our brain is saying stay alive. And therefore, we comply, we make up stories, we hide, we do things that are outside of our character, like lie, right? We do all of those things because it's survival over facts. So when a person is ready to leave and starts to have that turn, if you don't focus on getting them safe, teaching them that this is a safety issue, right, then again, they're going to override it because they're going to seek safety. It's wrong safety. It's false safety. That, I'm not trying to say that is safe, but that's what their brain has been conditioned. That's why kidnapped survivors will tell you, I don't know if you know the story of J.C. Dugard. She was held captive for, I think, 18 years. She was taken when she was 11 years old. She was held locked in chains until she was like 18. And then she was free for the last 10, free, meaning held in the backyard with no chains for 10 years. It's because her brain was conditioned to believe that where she was at was safer than what was on the other side of the fence, right? There's no physical chains. It's a brain problem that is done to you. And people will tell you a trauma bond is one of the strongest bonds that we as humans can experience. So yes, because its foundation is in safety and a false sense of safety.
And it's not a matter of intelligence.
It has nothing to do with intelligence.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with intelligence.
Yeah. Does the predator know that it's that powerful? Are they aware of just how strong this is going to be, or after, if he's 40 years old, has he seen this so many times that he knows that when he gets the next target, she will be that compliant?
Sure. It's one of the questions I sometimes ask when I'm talking to survivors or teaching about this is, is it intentional? Do they know? And the answer is yes and no. So some of these behaviors are very intentional. They very much know A plus B equals C. They intentionally do it. Others are just natural in them. I use the example of us. If somebody opens a door for me, I say thank you. I don't even hear myself say it. It's just naturally what I do. Somebody gives me a gift, I sit down and intentionally write a thank you note, right? So there are some behaviors I do to connect with people that I don't even realize I'm doing, and there's other behaviors that I'm very intentionally doing. It's the same thing for them with control. Sometimes they just lie for lying's sake because it's just what they do. They're not intentionally trying to cause harm in the moment, but they're just liars, right? So they make up stories and want to control the narrative in the moment with a story that's made up because it's just what they do. And other times it's very intentional, that they know every time I cheat on my partner, it's going to hurt the other person. But keep in mind, they don't have the experience of empathy, which is your hurt is my hurt, right? So they have an awareness that it causes harm, but they don't have empathy because they don't understand how it hurt you. So they're going to keep doing it because they don't have the ability to understand how it hurts you. Right? They will also, kind of a tangent, but they might make change because it hurts them, meaning if they don't want to go to jail or they don't want to get a divorce, they'll kind of correct their behavior. They won't be able to maintain the change, but they'll correct their behavior because it would negatively impact them, not because it's causing harm to you. Mm-hmm. So they can have an awareness that it's causing harm, but they're not going to change the behavior because they don't have empathy. Because they don't get it. Mm-hmm. So they're just going to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. We started to touch on compliance too. That was something else that your book really helped me to understand, because I couldn't believe how much compliance I would see to this man who was in my life, and even after the fact, the people who would smear campaign and things. And your book breaks down three big things: persuasive reasoning, coercion, and subterfuge. Could you just cover a little bit about how that makes people so compliant?
Yeah, persuasive reasoning, unfortunately, uses our own good thinking against us. So again, the perpetrator understanding what's important to you is them using it against you. So they use your own reasoning. Persuasive reasoning, like you're a really good mom and you need to stay in this marriage because you're a good mom, and here's all the reasons you're a good mom, and so you've got to make this work. So that their ability to craft the story and use words to put together a reason, right? Now, our brains are fact-finding organs. We want to understand. So they can use language to do that. So that's persuasive reasoning. Coercion is the pressure. You have to. This is directly, in my opinion, related to the conscientiousness of the survivor, right? The pressure of you have to do it this way. We can't divorce because the church doesn't allow it. You have to show up for the kids. I've got to be doing all these other things. You have to show up for the kids. So it's that constant pressure of expectation. There's some manipulation in there, meaning if you don't, then I will, right? So there's that kind of factor at play in coercion. And the subterfuge is the not so subtle manipulation. I'm going to come in and tell you to do this, and I'm going to pull the carpet out from your ability to do it, right? You've got to show up for the kids, but I'm going to show up at the last minute and tell everybody you're a horrible parent, right? So that type of kind of sabotage is really what it is making it hard for anything to be true. So if you think about how disorienting all of those things are, right, for someone who's experiencing it, right? You rip the carpet from underneath me. You're putting pressure on me to be something I know I am, but you're telling me I'm not, right? Or you're giving me all of this reasoning that is overwhelming from society or my circle or whatever. So the survivor who's experiencing that, it's just so powerful and frankly confusing and chaotic. And so, as I said, when you're in those states of mind, you make really bad decisions. So sometimes you don't always do the right thing, which means you don't always leave, right? Because I just need to get through this moment. Mm-hmm. So those things really play a role in how survivors are impacted.
Mm-hmm. So in a later phase of a relationship, you might start to recognize these things or, be bothered in some way. And it would seem natural to raise problems with the pathological lover. And yet people don't.
Yeah.
What would prevent raising these problems, having a natural discussion about these things?
there's probably already learning that has taken place that allows you to feel as if you don't have any power, and again, it goes back to safety, that what is safe is for me to comply. So that is probably, I would say, the number one reason why people stop bringing up issues. It never works. Another kind of dynamic at play, aside from the ones we just talked about, is this Cartman triangle of communication, this pattern of communication that we all experience. But someone who's a psychopath only communicates from these three perspectives: a persecutor, rescuer, or a victim. So in any conversation, they are either going to persecute you, they're either going to play the victim, or they're going to rescue you. And when you're trying to solve a problem and you bring up, hey, I need you to do this differently, you're now the persecutor. So the psychopath is naturally going to be the victim or the rescuer. The problem is, in a healthy communication pattern, we would work ourselves out of that dynamic by me having empathy for you, me having emotional understanding, and we would move to a new place. There'd be apologies and commitments to never do those things again, and the issue would be resolved and likely not revisited. But when you don't have empathy and you don't have emotional depth, you can't get out of that cycle. So I, as a partner, bring up an issue, and the psychopath plays the victim or the rescuer, and then it puts me into, now I'm, if they play the victim, now I got to rescue them and make them feel better. So we stay in this cycle that doesn't ever lead to resolution. And so we just stop talking about it. And by the way, if you're really conscientious and you're solving problems, then you just become the billboard, and you know that there's all these problems and you just go solve it yourself. So now we've stopped talking, nothing gets resolved. The perpetrator is going and doing what the perpetrator does, which is what the perpetrator wanted, right? This is why another myth is that perpetrators like this are looking for doormats. They're not looking for doormats. They're looking for billboards. They're looking for someone who will put on the front, pretend nothing's wrong so they can be left alone to do what they want. A doormat, and I don't want to use that term to imply and talk about people that way, but someone who has, can't stand up to this is not the kind of person a perpetrator is going to stay in a long-term relationship with. Chances are, if you're in a long-term relationship, you are a person who is capable of putting on a front, solving the problems, handling the nasty business. And that's what a perpetrator wants.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, there's also a dichotomy of perceived protection versus created dependency. So this person is sort of pressed into a position where they are dependent?
Yes. Again, it's that conflict of, I'm going to go out and you're going to do something bad to me, or the survivor is going to have something bad done to them, or going to be in a dangerous situation, and the perpetrator is going to come and protect them and make them feel safe. So they may have been out 3 nights before with their affair, but when something bad happens to you, they're going to show up and rescue you, right? So again, it's that constant lack of consistency and dichotomous experience of your partner that is the harm. And again, it's when you have some objectivity, you can see that they would always rescue me, but they were always the one causing me harm, right? And again, without objectivity, you can't see that. You just think this is who he is or they are, and we're just getting through life.
Yeah. And there's also this idea of thought-killing phrases as well. So people I've talked to in the cult space, they'll point out how, I think it was in the Moonies, they would say, oh, that's stinking thinking. If somebody started to raise a problem, with the guy who I've seen, he would set these sort of deadlines that were impossible. If you tried to raise some problem, he'd say, no, we have something else. The world ends tomorrow. We got to get this thing, and just move past it.
Yes, and that's kind of that unique language that gets developed between a perpetrator and their victims. These kind of key phrases, words they use a lot that mean something, or they've created meaning, to be able to use it against you. So all the intimate relationships have those kind of little things that mean something important. And again, it's a mind control / I'm controlling your thinking about a certain situation, giving you no wiggle room, grounded in a lack of safety. Keep in mind, this all goes back to, at some point in our relationship, repeatedly, you have made me unsafe, came along and made me feel safe, and then attached these phrases to that concept.
Jennifer, we talk about how these relationships often end with a discard, some variation on the discard. One move that I've seen is keeping the ex-girlfriend as a friend and as sort of as sort of this sign of how magnanimous the predator is. Keith Raniere was notorious for this. He would sort of keep all his old lovers around.
Yes.
How does that work? Because it seems counterintuitive for some people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking to build their network, looking to build their circus performers, if you will, people who will
Yes.
show up and act the way they've been taught to act to demonstrate that they are okay and will pass the smell test, if you will, for their next partner. Now, I do want to say the reverse can be true. Sometimes what you see is that they will trash and blame their previous partner as a way to manipulate their current partner. So both can happen, right? They can have control of their past partner and have them show up and not speak and look like a good girlfriend and ex-girlfriend, sorry, and or ex-wife or whatever, and tell the narrative. Probably still has custody of his kids on some level, so it all looks great. But the opposite can be true as well, where they're like, hey, my ex-wife did horrible things to me. She's a terrible person. I can't trust her. That's also a way to ingratiate themselves and paint a narrative that pulls you towards them. You're either going to be pulled because they're good or pulled because they're bad, right? So again, over time, those things will sort themselves out. But initially, it's how they get you to be pulled towards them that we have to pay attention to. But yes, all these folks have kind of these people, chess players, if you will, circus performers who will show up for them. That is what they become good at.
So it sounds like a romantic relationship then can even be a strategy to move someone into a more connected place, even though they might then be made no longer the girlfriend or something like that. But that's my ex-girlfriend now. She's always kind of going to be in my circle. We're going to be best friends forever, that kind of thing. And that's still strengthening the facade.
Yes, everyone is a tool. Everyone has a place that can be used when needed. Situationally, in the moment, everyone has a place. So yes, they will use people to show that they are good. They will use people to show that they are bad or to say they're not bad, whatever is needed. So yes, everyone will have a place.
Even the enemy, even someone who's that ex-girlfriend, oh, she was actually very mentally ill, very dangerous. My old friend, oh, he was such a bad person.
Yes.
Now we have a
so
common
poorly.
enemy.
Yes, exactly. Again, when you are a highly conscious, agreeable person, you see, oh yeah, friends aren't supposed to do that to each other. Oh, and again, you're only getting the story from the dangerous person, which is why time becomes important, because we need time to see the stories play out. But nonetheless, that's a terrible person, and oh, you shouldn't have been treated that way. Now we can align. Now you're twinning with me, right? I see who these bad people are. So yeah, it's very dangerous. And a lot of this comes from what society has taught us about what is acceptable and why it's important sometimes to set aside society's filter and objectively see what is what and who is who, not just based on what society says is okay or what our family has said is okay. We've really got to work on our objectivity skills. Like I said, we were taught to have rose-colored glasses. We need to be taught to have objective glasses where we can really look and see what's going on.
Yeah. Jennifer, I have just a couple more questions, and one is along those lines. You mentioned society. What changes do you hope to see in society given what we know about psychopaths and low or no conscious individuals?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, clinically, that clinicians like myself will get better educated and do a better job educating society as a whole about the nature of these disorders and the severity that we know has existed for decades and decades. This is not new to any clinician who understands this on a real level. So I hope that changes. I also hope that people will learn that it is okay to have boundaries. Now that seems so silly because we've been talking about boundaries for decades, and thanks to Oprah, we know all this great stuff about boundaries. But what boundaries truly mean is that sometimes other people are going to be hurt or give us the appearance of hurt, and that is okay. And that is okay because you have done a better job understanding what it means to be safe and feel safe. So if you are doing a thing that keeps you safe, any healthy person is going to respond perfectly well to your boundary. They're not going to have a problem. They may want to ask some questions. They may want to understand. But if it's about your safety and it's a healthy person who you're handing the boundary to, they will be perfectly fine. So having people understand the value of safety in their lives and empowering them to get safe and be safe, I think is okay. I think we also have to tear down conceptions in society about patriarchy and male and female gender roles that are harmful, ideas that have kept people believing that types of people are more powerful than others. I think that is very, very, very dangerous. So kind of breaking through some of those systems that have caused harm for a really long time. Domestic violence, we believed for a long time that it was about male control over women. And that was believable because men have been in control of women. I'm not saying that is not true. That is absolutely still true. And we need to break through the idea that men are more powerful than women. They are not. However, we also have to come to understand what it means to get safe and be safe and empower people to take up their space and take their power, regardless of their gender. So I think those things really need to be kind of tackled. And we need to see each other as people and a desire to keep each other safe, regardless of who we think other people are.
Well, Jennifer Young, before I ask my last question, you mentioned educating people. Where should people go to learn more from you online?
Sure. You can visit my website, jenniferyounglmhc.com. I really look forward to anybody can email me or whatever they'd like. I love to talk to people about this stuff. So they can go to my website.
All right. We'll put a link in the description for people to check out. And Jennifer Young, my final question is just, what's a success story that you've seen in all this?
I'm very, very lucky to have many, many success stories. And I kind of get chills when I think about it because I've been doing this long enough to watch people leave some of the most dangerous situations and end up in new relationships where they can just blossom. One of my survivors now is finally going back to school, picking up where she left off in a master's degree and going to be, probably a professor or end up in law school, those kinds of things that were started when they were younger and got completely derailed. So it doesn't matter whether somebody ends up in college or just ends up having their own apartment for the first time. It's watching someone get back to themselves, really stepping into their power, their positive power of who they are, and finding that sense of safety in their tiny new apartment or their big mansion with their new partner or, in another country, wherever they land, that they just have this sense of peace and safety about themselves that they can then use for strength. I think that's, kind of amazing. And I feel very, very, very blessed to have that, to be a part of that. I will add everybody says, oh, how long do people stay in these relationships? I had a client reach out to me. I had worked with her years previously, and she called me one day and she said, well, my mom left. I'm like, what, your mom left? She goes, my mom left my dad. And this woman had been married to this man for 62 years. 62 years. And my client tells me the story. She said, I was visiting my mom in the state where she lived, and my brother and I took her out to lunch, and she showed up for lunch, and we were talking, and the mom finally said to both the kids, I'm ready to leave. And they're like, leave? And they knew there were domestic violence in the home. And after 62 years of marriage, this mom said, no, I'm ready to leave now. Like, I'm not going back. And they're like, well, do you want to get your stuff? Do you need it? She goes, nope, I have my pocketbook. I have my pocketbook. I need to leave right now. They got her on a plane that day, and she flew from that Midwestern state to California with my client, and I did a couple sessions with her. She was in her 80s and had been married for 62 years and left him on a random Tuesday with her pocketbook and nothing else. And, there had been physical violence, decades and decades of harm caused to her, and after 62 years, she said that was enough. So I think that is, it's never too late. And sometimes it takes that long, and, I'm sorry for her, but it's what it was. So, but she left with her pocketbook after lunch and never went back.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer Young, for your work that you do with patients, for educating people, for putting some of your wisdom into this book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, that I found to be such a great resource, and for taking this interview with me, thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks, Brad.
To help raise awareness about narcissistic abuse, please share this video. It helps a lot.